to Canon Fodder Live. Ordinarily, we put these out on Waypoint, text-based blogs, but today we thought for Halo World Championships we would do this in a more informal format. So I would like to very much introduce the three wonderful guests I have with me today. Starting off here with Mr. HiddenXperia, an iconic Halo community member.
Woo!
Yeah,
Hey,
let's hear some noise
you.
for him.
The actual most famous person here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far. Thank you very much. I'm honored. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's here, and thank you for having me on. This is going to be fun.
Pleasure as always, man. And then next up we have a Mr. Jeff Easterling, Halo franchise writer.
See, I told you. It got real quiet after HiddenXperia.
You just got to start some YouTube content, man.
My plan is working, actually. That's what that means.
And then finally, Mr. Jeremy Patenaude, also the Halo franchise team.
Woo!
Awesome.
Jeremy's my favorite person.
I thought I was your favorite.
He has seniority.
All right, so we thought we'd start off by talking about Halo Expanded Universe in general, right? So we've got quite a lot of fiction out there, I think it's fair to say. Jeff, do you have an exact number of books altogether?
Oh, gee, like altogether, I mean, we had just released our, novel number 34, 35?
Something like that, yeah.
And then, when you count in reference material, definitive guides and encyclopedias and stuff, it's up there.
So there's quite a lot, is what you're saying.
Quite a lot.
And it can be a little bit intimidating, perhaps, to get into some of that material. And, maybe a lot of people here are interested in, how do I do that? So I thought we'd start things off. The first question I wanted to ask, and we'll start with you, Luke, actually, because I think it could be some interesting diversity of answers here. What do you think is a good onboarding piece of Halo media to get you into that expanded universe?
For me, I would honestly say the book, The Flood, because it's the easiest crossover point between the games and the books, because it's a novelization of Halo 1. So it has a story that you recognize, with characters that you already know, and kind of plot points that you understand as well. But the best thing is there's extra stuff there that is either hinted at in the game or just isn't in the game at all and only adds to it. So I'd say that's the best kind of onboarding, and then that gives you a taste of what the expanded universe has to offer. And then once you've read all the extra details, you're right, I can go deeper into this, and then you go on to the Fall of Reach or whatever else you want to read. But for me, definitely the Flood. It's the greatest kind of bridge between both parts of the universe, I think.
So we are getting The Flood from HiddenXperia. I don't think anybody...
Super unexpected.
Yeah, who could have seen that one coming? Jeff, what do you think?
Oh, man. Honestly, it kind of depends.
I've got to keep you on time.
Yeah,
Jeff.
I know. You know what? I'm going to go a left field one. I actually really like Halo Legends for something like this. It's cool because it's a visual medium, it's short stories, and it gives you an overall flavor of the universe, with some different styles. There's stuff that you can recognize as that feels very game-centric, but then there are other elements that, kind of highlight some of the different, alien cultures, but it still hits all the same themes, and it's widely accessible, being the type of medium that it is.
And you start off with that Origins two-parter as well, which is Cortana giving you a complete rundown of kind of everything that's happened from the time of the Forerunners all the way up to the end of Halo 3. So that is a really good primer, and then you launch off into these other stories, which you've got the elites on their homeworld, and the sort of how the Arbiter became this badge of shame and stories like that. I think that's a really good answer, yeah. And then Jeremy, what do you reckon?
I mean, I'm going to go with the typical one, Fall of Reach, because I think Fall of Reach sets the sort of the ground rules for the universe, and you get the deep roots of lore that you would expect. But I'd also say, and undergird it with Halo Contact Harvest, because I thought Contact Harvest did a great job of really laying some deep history underneath the universe that wasn't there before, and it came from Joseph Staten. So there was a kind of tone of this was really coming from the heart of Halo, and so Contact Harvest, I think, had the deepest cut in terms of lore, and getting somebody from a position of not knowing the universe to having a really good understanding and really good grasp of the story of Halo.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a really good answer. Luke, did you have something to say there?
I was going to say, and also, who doesn't want more Johnson, right? Like, you have Johnson on the cover art, it's like you're going to read it. You are going to read it.
There you go.
It's always a good shout, yeah. I think for me, actually, I've got a slightly different answer in that I think Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn, the live action, so it started off obviously as a web series that would release in 5 parts, but then we kind of turned it into a movie format in future releases. I think that is a really good sort of onboarding experience as well, because you get that initial flavor of like the human versus human conflict going on in the universe as like a background bit. You're introduced with Thomas Lasky and he's kind of in the middle of that, and then the Covenant suddenly arrive and just like suddenly all the bets are off. This is this new fight we're in. And then the Master Chief shows up and he kicks the Covenant's ass, and then they escape the planet and you are teed up for the events of Halo 4 after that. So wherever you kind of are coming in, I think that's a really good onboarding experience as well. So there we go. Yeah. We got Forward Unto Dawn, we got Halo the Flood, we've got, Jeff, what was yours again? I've already forgotten what you said.
Legends.
Legends, that was it. And then Contact Harvest and
Fall of Reach.
And Fall of Reach,
I mean,
of course.
You can't really have that kind of question without the Fall of Reach coming up.
Someone's got to answer with that, right? There's got to be one person that answers that.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on then to our next topic. This is a multiplayer-centric event. I think people would probably agree with that statement. And the Halo universe, I think, is quite unique because when you go into multiplayer, you're not just fighting in these kind of abstract spaces. You are in these areas where you get a real sense that there's a world, a history, a story behind a lot of these multiplayer maps that you play on. And that, I think, has been true throughout the series from like start to finish, really. Well, not that we're finished at all, but from Halo 1 to Halo Infinite. So yeah, I thought we'd talk a little bit about like what some of our kind of favorite multiplayer maps are, which have that kind of sense of history around it. And Jeremy, I guess I'll start with you. On that question.
I need time to prepare my answer. No, just kidding. I mean, one of the things I was talking about backstage was that in Halo 2 there was a little bit of a transition where there was clarity around the fiction by these little descriptions that were more than, you know, bang bang whatever, like from Battle Creek.
Stay frosty.
Yeah, stay frosty. Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting step because at that point we really were starting to dig into what the lore was for each of these spaces. And I mean, Midship, for example, was the Pious Inquisitor. I found that fascinating, and we took like that lore, expanded into Heretic, and then into even the books. And so I think that's where I found this interesting, is that the multiplayer environments, because they're part of the universe, they can show up in other mediums, and people recognize what they are. It's not, like you said, an abstract space that's just throwaway after you're done playing it.
Absolutely. And then Jeff, what do you reckon?
Man, there's a bunch. I've always stared at Epitaph, and I mean that was a nice, gave us a nice opportunity even to have some connective tissues. You know, when we were working on the story for Halo Infinite, to actually draw a direct connection to that hologram that you've been seeing floating up there since 2007.
This guy's getting a bit excited.
That's what I like to hear.
Your reaction video made it all worth it.
That's the entire reason.
It really is. Yeah, it's the entire
reason. I should tell this story because we were obviously part of Forerunner pilot group and everything back when the game was coming out. And I had played through on Heroic the first time, whereas this madman here, he went Legendary first time through. Yep. And so I had finished it. I got to the end of Halo Infinite. I was like,
see how your faith has been rewarded. You know?
Exactly.
I got to the end of the game. I thought, oh yeah, that was really great. I love that ending. And then I immediately get a call from this guy over Discord, and he's like, we need to talk, because I just finished the game on Legendary, and they just did something. And of course, the name drop of offensive bias there. And man, I wish you could have heard the noises this guy was making.
I will never forget that moment for as long as I live of hearing those two words said in a game.
Offensive bias has been deployed.
I will never forget that, like ever. That is my purest reaction to anything.
But I think that, I mean, even just you saying that, like that, that's another example of how this space that was not a because the neat thing about multiplayer, you touched on it a little bit, is sometimes the multiplayer maps give us the ability to showcase or visualize another corner in the universe that may just not make sense to spend a whole campaign on, or even a campaign level on, but we still want to give like a glimpse into some of that. And like being able to draw some of those connections and then cross that ground. But yeah, Epitaph like stands out to me a lot. But Halo 4's maps were also ones that I spent a lot of time they were absolutely beautiful.
Absolutely.
Like looking at a monolith and wondering like, what is this for and what could this be for? Yeah,
We had
some really great ones there
as well, where those creatures you see in the tubes,
Yes.
and they show up in one of Kelly Gay's novels in Point of Light, and that
Yep.
was really exciting indeed. Yeah. All right, well, we've got some more multiplayer maps here, just in case we wanted to prompt any thoughts. Luke, I know that one of these is definitely a favorite of yours.
I was going to say, this is perfect because I actually want to talk about two briefly.
Okay.
One of which is, and they're actually both Halo 1 maps actually, so a bit left field. Chiron, right? That map is a gem, both in terms of its gameplay and also, I believe its description is just like basically confusion. No one knows what's going on in there. It's a weird training facility. Like, I like maps that get your minds kind of like going and leave a lot to be kind of interpreted, which is why I also love Derelict, because the kind of description of that map and also the theming of it and the atmosphere, especially given when in the franchise's lifespan it was made, like when the universe was very uncharted, nothing was cemented in, and it still had like a lot of that like late 90s sci-fi in it. It has this really like mysterious and creepy and like, I mean, desolate. The Halo 2 mirror is called Desolation for a reason, right? Like atmosphere to it that just has you wondering like, who was on this ship? Why is it here? Like, where's it going? Is it going to go anywhere? Where have they gone? Like, I love Halo 1's map's lore in particular because they really tried to, because the universe was still so new, they relied so heavily on your interpretation. And I like it when stuff does that. That's why I loved Epitaph as well for so long, because the hologram was left open. You know what it is now, and it's exactly what we all wanted it to be. And that's what I love. I love maps that do that.
And that aspect of the community is something that I think is great. Like, the years of Halo 3 of people speculating about the secret of Sandtrap and stuff like that. Just those things that really bring people together and just talk about these things is great.
Well, and an element there is that it's kind of important, like, when we're talking about lore, what things do we solve? You also have to be very careful with solving everything. Because part of the allure of some of these spaces is the fact that you don't know what every little thing is going on. And we always try to even be careful, even with something like, we talked a lot about like the Epitaph stuff and drawing this in and drawing the connection directly into the Infinite campaign, knowing though that, okay, we're gonna satisfy this mystery, but it has to also open up other ones. So now that you know, like, oh, that is this, but wait, now what does that mean? Does that mean that, so like if you can solve an element in a mystery and it splits off into further questions, I think that's the best kind, because not every mystery can be a mystery the whole time, because if you have no payoff ever, then sometimes it's hard to get into it.
It's been 10
but
years,
like you
I've not
also
had any answers.
Yeah. But I think if you can open it up to other mysteries, and you have thoughts on that. We've had many a conversation there.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to have mystery, because mystery is what the force that drives the questions. And if you remove all the mystery from these maps, then there's not going to be any reason to speculate about it or to bring them into books. And so, it's important to preserve the mystery where it's necessary and create new mysteries where we actually resolve some. So that's important to us.
And I think there's a really good one also on this slide as well, where in the bottom left we've got High Noon from Halo Reach, which was one of the Combat Evolved Anniversary maps, which was added to the game. And it's the Hang'em High remake, isn't it? Yeah, where you look out at the skybox of this map, and there's just this massive portal complex, almost like as big as the one you see in Halo 3's campaign. It's like, where does that portal lead to? And we got to tie in some stuff with that in Halo Shadows of Reach. I don't know, Jeff, what do you want to exposit a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the High Noon, I wanted super badly to find a way to eventually figure out a way to use that, because that's another map that I would just spend a lot of time in it. Jeremy and I did a lot of conversations with, specifically when we were talking with Troy. We knew certain things were in place with the plot of the book that would necessitate some of this, and it was just a natural fit. In fact, there's interesting give or take there, because once we realized, hey, we want to make the High Noon map pivotal to this element in the story, then it works backwards, where we actually take the map and all these screenshots, and then we were working with Troy closely to be like, hey, as we describe these things in the book, here are the points of reference, ideally so that a player could start to recognize, wait a second, like I know that mountain range or that like forerunner structure, and see. So now it's, you know, it's neat. You can go and, you know, if you read the book, you can go and play in this map and look, be like, wait, that's the portal they came through. Like that's where this happened. And it also gives you a cool kind of moment in time for the map that doesn't close off like some of the mystery of like, you know, other elements. But now when you look at it, you see like there's a whole deeper meaning to this specific space.
Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to just add a little bit to that. Yeah, I mean, it was a blast working with Troy on this and figuring out how we could get that in there. But to think that, like, so the space that you're in Halo Shadows of Reach is the same space, relatively speaking, as Halo First Strike back in 2003, and that there's connective tissue to a multiplayer map that seemingly was unrelated, that has deep, deep ties to not only that, but to events in First Strike and events in Halo 2. That kind of stuff thrills us because it not only creates this interesting mystery for people coming at it freshly, but it pays off for fans who've read all those things and really have a vested interest in there being that connective tissue. And so it was a joy to put that in there with Troy and to work through the details and make sure the details are consistent from one book to the next.
We had a lot of fun with that on Rubicon Protocol, didn't we? With where those things line up. And speaking of which, I think I want to give a particular shout out to Halo Guy, who might be out there in the audience. There he is. I see him.
Halo Guy.
Hello, man. Yeah, so he put together these really impressive videos linking together areas of the campaign map with what happens in the book, like where and when. And I shared this obviously with you two, and we were just blown away by that. So shout out to you, man. Amazing work.
Great job.
And then Luke, I think for us coming at this like from a community point of view, when we're exploring these maps, you probably have a lot of similar memories to me of like there are these spaces outside you can't quite get to in your normal sort of player state. So you go into Forge and you get those teleporters lined up. You go outside of the map and it's
turret,
like
you lean back off the turret.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have to wonder how many people have probably experienced Halo by doing that, because those maps just naturally make you want to explore those spaces.
Yeah, 100%. The biggest example of that for me was cold storage in Halo 3. Seeing all those like flood hives through the window.
Again, another flood map, huh?
I know, right? Almost like there's a trend there.
We knew what we were bringing you here for.
Exactly. I've got to deliver, right? I've got to deliver. Yeah, no, like
as advertised.
Exactly. But no, like seeing out like the flood stuff out the window and be like, I want to go in there and see that. Or, for example, like seeing all the ships outside, like midship, and like I want to go see them. Like I love that kind of like just beyond reach thing. It's like it feeds back to what I said earlier about really building into like your own interpretation for maps. Because when something's just out of reach, you're like, I want to get there, but I don't know how. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, we've got. Go on.
I was gonna say, I'm curious. Like, do you have any? When you're doing content, you referenced Halo Guy stuff, which is a great example. Do you have any specific like favorite kind of searching for clues, like breadcrumb moments for, I mean, you mentioned offensive bias, like I think is part of that, but like from a content creation and community perspective there.
So a few years ago I did a video about the lore behind cold storage in particular, because there was a really old like Bungie.net post about some of the strings of like the monitor that was there that disappeared or something. I can't remember the intricate details about it, but basically it was diving into like how that outbreak happened in cold storage and the links that has to the Gravemind in Halo 2 and how that formed. And when you put all the pieces together, it starts to make like a pattern. It's like, oh, so that cold storage outbreak may be like the beginning of the Gravemind in Halo 2. And then also that links to backwash as well. Like, is the backwash facility on the surface of cold storage? Like, is that why that's like, I like that when all the like little strings from different maps start to link together. It's like what you were saying before about like with High Noon. And then also with Epitaph as well, how you get all these little pieces that start to connect together and make like one coherent story. But it requires you to go and search for those pieces. Like it's not like a narrative where it tells you it or where it's like very clear. You have to go and find them yourself. And I love that kind of like player-driven storytelling. And that's why multiplayer map lore is so interesting to me, because it's based entirely on that.
Absolutely. And then going back to this slide as well, I just love when elements of the universe sort of like connect in ways that like they're not really surface level. I mean, if we look at Solace from Halo 4, you know, you've got this beam holding this star in some kind of stasis field, and then that connects back to, you know, for people who are aware of it and have read into it, like some of the stuff we talk about in the Forerunner trilogy from Greg Bear about how that, you know, there's a whole area of Forerunner society that do this sort of thing, that play around with stars, and that is just like a key area of the universe. And then we look to some of the more iconic maps too, like Lockout, just to bring back to that flood theme with some of the remakes there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, Lockout is one that I love because it's like another one of these mysterious facilities where it's like the flood have broken out. Where's everyone gone? Why is nobody here? Why are the flood not in the tanks anymore? Yeah. And then you get like the H2A remake, and some of the flood are in the tanks, some aren't. Like, where are they? Like, leaves a lot to be interpreted.
And, you know, we're talking about some of the big stuff here, the big movements in the universe, but sometimes it's like you're on the pit and you can see the Warthog, the troop transport hog out there, and like the world beyond. It's like, I want to go out there, actually. I just want to drive that thing around and just do some crazy stuff with it.
Also, it's a shout out to things like the audio teams that work, like the soundscape on these kinds of things too. And you know, it's just like when you look at it, there's storytelling, but an interesting thing about multiplayer maps is that all of that storytelling pretty much has to be done through the environment. So you have obviously the incredible art like that goes into that. And that's the, you know, the immediate thing that probably strikes most people. But also just the soundscape beyond them. And that goes, you know, across like Halo maps, new and old, all have elements there that, whether it be, you know, you had mentioned even like backwash, or even like when I think about in Halo Reach maps where the radio check, you know, you could find some of the radios that are giving you little glimpses of that. And again, it's all kind of part of this multi-sensory like way to communicate a story. There's a spot on Monolith in Halo 4 that, like, if you stand in a certain spot underneath like the bases, it like sings to you. Like there's like a resonance that is specific, you know. And I would just stand there and like, what is it saying?
And everyone else is shooting at you. Like, why isn't this guy playing?
This is also why I'm bad at multiplayer. Because I'm standing. I wonder what this Forerunner structure is for. And everyone's like, please arm the bomb. Like, please just arm the bomb.
Well, it's like Epitaph as well, right? Like, you stand there, you see this massive, like, ornate hologram, and then you hear the hymn in the background, and it's like, who's singing that? Why is it playing? Like, it gives off this real, like, regal and holy aura to it.
And I think it speaks to something that's central to Halo, which is, and Alex and I were talking about this the other day, Halo, whether you're in campaign or multiplayer, the environment is really one of the main characters of the story, one of the main characters of the you know, the context and the framework of where you're playing. And so it's incredibly natural for Halo to have environments and maps that actually are that. They have their own personality, they have their own vibe, and they feel real and alive through the audio, through the way that they've got the props set up in the map, and just the basic geometry. And they do a really great job of executing what we expect from the campaign in multiplayer spaces. It's
funny, when you talk about mystery, even bring up, when you were talking about like, oh, and I wonder if this or if there's some of that stuff that we purposely just don't answer on, even like for ourselves. Like, you know, on the curative side, there are things that we will either solve or put in place that we may not make public either, you know, immediately or ever, but sometimes it's still like, okay, if we know what this is for, we can bring things and attach to it. But there's also a lot of stuff that we're like,
this must remain sacred.
No,
we don't
it's
know.
Off limits.
It's off limits.
We're not going to give an answer. Yeah. We want to keep it vague. We may have an idea what we want it to be, but we won't pull the trigger on that.
I mean, you also want to keep the magic for yourselves as well, a little bit,
right?
Oh,
absolutely.
Like, you don't want to completely erode the magic for yourselves by explaining everything, even if like you never reveal those explanations. Yeah. It's like you want to keep it for yourself.
I think as well, tying that back to what you were saying, Luke, about Halo 1's maps, you know, with the auditory experience, that is such a part of making these spaces feel so like, you know, lifeless in a really deliberate way.
Yeah.
Like, what happened here? What have I sort of like stumbled upon?
I will never forget the ambient sound of Derelict. It's the most like haunting sound. I couldn't even describe it. It's just,
I was tempted to ask you to make that sound for everyone online, but I won't ask you to do that.
I will not make everyone
A
hear
meme was
bleed.
born. That's what
And then, like as we were saying on the curative side of things, obviously we had this big encyclopedia release earlier this year, which was quite a monumental task that it must have been. Yeah. There we go. Someone.
There we go. Yeah,
there it is.
There.
We sold one.
Yay! Oh, 2.
We got 2.
We sold 2.
Let's go.
This is great.
So, like, taking a lot of that information, because we do touch on some multiplayer stuff in there, don't we? Like, on your end, how do you kind of break down a lot of that to communicate to people who might be coming into it and thinking, I hadn't necessarily made that connection between those sort of like those 2 points? Asking the big questions.
So I mean, in terms of connections, I mean, I'm getting PTSD from the year and a half, 2 years of compiling this thing. But like, no, I mean, at some level, we already have flowing in our veins the kind of connections that we want to make, the kind of connections we want to keep sacred and mysterious, and not actually make links where people might think that they're going. And so I think a lot of it has to do with, as we lay out the book and as we engage what the pagination is going to be, what makes sense to start to connect the dots on, and what makes sense to hold our cards down and not show them. And for some stuff, the interesting thing about the encyclopedia is we'll have ideas for other stories as we're processing the material that we have beyond what we normally were planned and slated for. And like there'll be times where we'll be working through, like Jeff and I were holed up in a room basically reading it out loud in some of the final iterations. And we paused for a second. I was like, that's actually a really interesting corner. Let me jot that down.
Yep.
We've written and edited, but when you got it all in front of you at the same time, you see things with a clarity that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so there are connections that come into being, not necessarily answered in the encyclopedia, but that actually did come into being for the future that came about just by reading through the material that was in the universe already.
We've talked about it. There's all sorts of little, I wonder if that's what you were going to talk about. Like, there's all sorts of little sprinklings of things, not even necessarily, well, I guess it is actually multiplayer related. Like, I always joke with Alex, and we're like, hey, has anybody talked about the Promethean warrior servants?
I somehow knew we were coming to this point.
There's, like, as an example, there's an entry in the encyclopedia that actually gives a little further background to 3 Warzone bosses from Halo 5 that I've yet to see anybody make the connection. Maybe somebody has, but now you'll be looking.
Challenge to the audience to do that.
Yeah, that's right. I've waited long enough. I now want to see. There's a little bit of an extra breadcrumb, but yeah, to your point, it's some of these things just spring up organically, like and like a franchise like Halo has so many different storytelling channels that sometimes something else will come out of it, and they're like, you know what? Actually, we can connect here. There's a spot in this multiplayer map. There's a spot from over here that would give this a life and a weight that it might not necessarily otherwise have. And again, that's always a balance, because you don't want everything to feel like you have to research or do deep roots, but you also want to reward investment at the same time. So it's a really careful balancing act, but it's a fun one to try to undertake.
It's funny as well, because like you look at the broader like community aspects of Halo, and things like machinima, people have been answering those questions for themselves in a lot of ways. I always remember Red versus Blue, I think it was the 6th season, where the sort of like one of the core ideas was like, what's the story behind that crashed Pelican on Valhalla? It's like one of those things we always ask ourselves, and then they have obviously gone out of their way to answer it. All right.
Now, so Jeremy brought up something. You were talking. You did.
Oh, yeah.
You did. You brought up that when in the encyclopedia development, that sometimes stories would pop up from it, and a particular story did pop up from it. That we actually decided to tell a little bit more of, if you want to talk about that. I think we should, if they're interested in like a
Do the
reveal
honors.
of some sorts. I feel like we should.
All right, so shall I set some context here?
I mean, I guess. I guess.
All right, so as we were going into a certain game called Halo 4, we were introducing a new character and villain to that particular story, a central kind of nemesis to the Master Chief. And, you know, I feel like we've not seen him for a little while, perhaps.
Yeah.
Last time we saw him was in the Halo Escalation comic series, where we sort of follow on from the end of the Halo 4 story, and we kind of defeat the Didact in a different way with Blue Team, and it's been a long time since then. So I guess if we move forward here, we can do a special announcement that a new novel from our beloved Kelly Gay is coming out. Halo Epitaph, the Didact returns.
There it is. There it is.
I have been, as soon as you told me about this, like months ago it must have been, I was like, how am I going to keep this one quiet? This is just like, I'm excited. I can't wait for those drafts to come back in. Yeah, the Didact story continues soon. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you told me like a week ago now, and I've been the exact same way for the last week. Like, this is something that I've waited for so long. And it's, yeah.
So this is just an example. I mean, I'm not going to give anything away about it, but this is an example of something that just, we were talking through the Didact's profile entry in the encyclopedia, and Jeff and I were on the same page about kind of a general direction that it should go in, and now we have an opportunity to with Kelly, who's an amazing author and is going to knock this one out of the park.
Can we get a shout for Kelly, by the way?
You guys like Kelly Gay?
Like, and we're blessed, honestly, to work with creatives, not just like internal, but like external internal in a way. You know, the authors that we get to work with and help craft these stories, and that's, I am just as much excited about her name being attached to this as the Didact. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it is absolutely something that is in her storytelling wheelhouse, and you want to see a fun reaction, as you should have seen Kelly's reaction when we first broached this with her. Kid in a candy store, a very ancient candy store.
And of course, like, she's handled some of those really historic characters for Halo as well, like Guilty Spark throughout her books. And I think those are like really great stories to dive into, as well as like a new era for that character. So like kind of going back to our onboarding sort of like point, I think that is another sort of like mini series within Halo, which is a good one to explore as well. And then just all of Kelly's books, they're amazing. They are absolutely amazing.
Can I just say as well, absolutely excellent title decision. Loving the title.
So
we knew you'd
weird,
like
yeah.
it.
What a
Yeah,
multiplayer map connection.
Almost like we planned it.
All right, so I think we want to look to wrap this up then, potentially. All right, so thank you all very much for tuning in for this very special live edition of Canon Fodder,
Thank you.
and enjoy the event. Do we want any closing remarks, everyone?
No.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you
just
guys for coming.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody.